Alright, so Necrospace. What what this game is it's a sci-fi ultra tech space exploration type game. Uh, Starts off as a survival horror. Think in the realm of Dead Space in particular. Um, it has a few other tropes from other things that I happen to like. For example, there's Dead Space, The Thing, Alien, and Aliens. Like at least the first two's atmosphere. Um, Even something like sort of like Resident Evil's theme, I suppose. But I pulled a bunch of things that I liked and I put them all together and made a thing. That's how most people make homebrew, so whatever. But anyway, um, this video right here should be the first in a series of the individual campaigns themselves. The campaigns are probably going, or the campaign videos are going to be much shorter than like my other games because Ultra Tech is hard, especially when you haven't done it in a really long time. This is the second time I've run this game. I am older and wiser, I suppose. First time I ran it, it was the very first game I ever DM'd, and I really enjoyed it. I made a lot of mistakes because one, I had never played this system before, and then two, I had never DM'd before, so it was a doozy. But with a lot of practice, and then just figuring out what you're supposed to do and not supposed to do, and actually playing the game, having it seeing it played is different from playing it. I've never even seen it being played, so yeah. But with practice, when time comes with practice comes perfection, I suppose. So over time, I got better at what I was doing, and I was running with a very small group of people. Then we were playing in person, and they wanted to play fantasy. So we had played Necrospace for like a couple months, maybe, give or take, and they wanted to play fantasy, and we were gonna like swap back and forth between the two. So we started the fantasy game, and they really enjoyed it because like I was a little more experienced by then. But then like, that game kind of fell apart. Like I'm still running that game. That is the Ranok game that's on here as well. But I that group fell apart for reasons, and this game kind of fell apart with it. But that was back in 2014 ish, 2015 ish. That's 2021 now, so it was a fucking while ago. But the plan is I wanted to redo this game. I wanted to remake it, and I wasn't entirely. I wanted to do it right. I wanted to do it justice because I really enjoy the survival horror genre, and I like horror when it's done right. That's what I have a problem with 90% of movies that come out these days. I've read really good horror books, and they're like a special kind of good. Keep you awake at night. And I wanted I wanted to bring that in. I didn't want it to be just another run-of-the-mill cookie-cutter, copy-paste type thing. Like the first time I ran this, I ran it because Dead Space 3 had come out, and I hated it, like most other people who played Dead Space 3. I wanted to love it, but EA is just awful. But that's another situation. So I just basically redid Dead Space 3 in the way I thought it should have been done. And, since then, this has just gained a life of its own, and it's become its own thing. So, like, whenever I say I didn't want to just copy-paste it, that's a really good example. They're not fighting just necromorphs and that's it. Like, they're fighting a creature of my own imagination, which is an amalgamation of all things terrible that you can imagine in the spirit of Dead Space. And, being trapped and alone and scared and all that good stuff. That's what I really wanted to capture. That's what I wanted to, what I wanted people to feel, right? And the plan is for this game to run, at least it's going to be in like 3 big parts. First part's survival horror. Everybody's playing as like the equivalent of very low level characters. Realistically, it's very small point totals. I mean, I'd say very small, but it's like 150 points, which is still really up there. But in comparison to something that they've been playing before, which was the fantasy game where they're all running around with 300-point characters, it's a big change of pace. So the idea is they're playing people who are not very capable at killing things, and they're thrown into a situation where they're just trying to survive. E.g., like Isaac Clarke from Dead Space, the first one, or most people from like the first horror game, Silent Hill, Resident Evil, all that good stuff. You just kind of you don't know what you're dealing with. You're just there. So the idea was I wanted to capture that. So the first chunk of the game is going to be survival horror ultra tech. I have the timeline brought up, and I'll get into that in just a second. But that's the first section. Once they get through it, I plan on it taking... Honestly, it depends on how much fun they're having. But like an in-game week, they have about 7 days or so before everything goes awful. Like they run out of food because they're in a place where they just don't have food, so they'll starve to death and die if they don't solve the problem in 7 days in game. Out of game, who knows how long that'll take. I expect at least 2 months, maybe 3 if we play every week. Maybe sooner, maybe later. It depends on how much fun everybody's having. If everybody's really enjoying it, I can stretch it out a little. If everybody's not enjoying it, well, I can squeeze it down at least some, even though this is really what I like a lot. It takes a special kind of person to like playing in a horror game, and sometimes it's hard to find those people. But the second half of the game is like a open world, space, travel, do stuff, screw around, sort of like what you would imagine doing in some sort of sandbox fantasy world, except it's a sandbox space world. For examples, you can think of something like the Firefly TV show, where you're just kind of gallivanting around space doing what you want. That's a pretty good example. And the idea is for that to take a little while, and I'm going to let them do that until they're either bored or they're looking for things to do, which, knowing my group, who knows how long it's going to take. But after that, stuff is going to be happening in the background, of course, all the time. That's just how I run the stories. So the last chunk is the whole we save the world, I guess worlds, universe, whatever you want to call it, part. And it's like a shooter / we're heroes type deal. And once we finish that, we'll cut the campaign and that'll be it. But this is the timeline. And it's the timeline as the PCs understand it. And as you can see, using Campfire Blaze here, because this is where I like to put my stuff. This is a really long timeline. There is a lot of things everywhere. And it kind of makes my computer unhappy because my computer is a piece of junk. But to give a basic rundown, timeline starts in 2050, and the Earth is running out of resources, and we just kind of problems got made, right? So we started trying to cast out into space to try to find some way to keep ourselves from dying off as a species, because we're effectively like a virus. We just kill whatever we're on. And so that's like 2050-ish. At 2250, we had already colonized things like the moon and Mars and, some of Saturn's moons and stuff like that. Well, anyway, towards the end of 2250, so about 200 years later, we found something that we just kind of stumbled upon it. And for those of you who are familiar, you can think the Mass Effect relays. And this is all taking place at like TL9-ish. People people stumbled upon, they found things, and there was actually hope for the first time in a really long time. And then here's the discovery, and the discovery of the relays themselves. After that, an empire started growing, based entirely around controlling trade from the relays. This allowed people who couldn't exactly travel very far or very fast, and you're talking, we're still using rocket engines at the time, so like it's difficult to travel, it's difficult to carry a lot of fuel, there is no FTL travel at this point. So these relays offer the only known way of FTL travel. And they basically shoot you across the universe to another relay that catches you, and it allows you to travel back and forth. So like more area was expanded, and the relays were always in new star systems that were like relatively easily colonized. And so this discovery is we're not alone, and yeah, like we're not alone. We found some other form of intelligent life. Now, we didn't find the life itself, but like the relays were obviously made by somebody. After that is the growth of an empire, and this is like the first big time jumps is around in here. And the empire grows really big. It gets really, really big and fat off of carrying tons and tons of trade back and forth through it. It becomes huge. This is also early TL10 is around in this time period, so 35-ish. And then you get too big, you start stepping on toes. This is the beginning of the end. There was some problems going on about it. And this is whenever they started like actually fighting like small scale wars, etc. And then it was becoming very costly to fight said wars, because at this point the universe was split into two areas, right? There was the inner colonies, and then there was the outer colonies. The inner colonies being like, you know, Earth, I guess technically not a colony, but close enough. Then you have like the first colonies, like the Moon, Mars, Titan, so on and so forth. And then as you get further out, you had like the first outer colonies, and so on and so forth, right? So the outer colonies, so that's the ones that are many relay jumps away from where they're trying to be, they became the outer colonies. Now the outer colonies were at a TL lower than this, so they're still TL9 around this time period. That's just how I split it up to make tech different in different areas. But wars started breaking out because of taxation, and then the Federation is wanting people to be a part of them, and they're treating people awful. You can think something like Star Wars, I suppose. Like, people kind of get that reference. But anyway, that's the beginning of the end. There's lots of fighting happening, and it's becoming a war of attrition on the Federation's side. They can't afford to send huge battle cruisers out, because A, the biggest of the size don't fit in these relays, and then B, the cost for like waging a war so far from home was unbelievable. And then it's just like small rebellions, so as soon as they put them down, they start back up again. So anyway, that's the beginning of the end. And then like we also find a crashed spaceship, and they call it the Alpha ship, because it was, as far as we know, it was the first. It was the first thing anybody's ever found. It has a reactionless drive, so a spaceship engine, you just pour energy into it, it points you in a direction, you go. It doesn't take fuel, and that's something that's very important. But it also included the very first hyperdrive, which allowed FTL travel. And this is 3529. Let's see, this is a super important ship. Now, it was found, and there's some other stuff that went around in here. The big war, the World's War One, happens around this time period, and it's a giant mess. This spaceship was found, and then it was immediately reclaimed by the Federation, even though it wasn't even in their space. And They took it, and then they took all documents of it, and then like killed everyone who didn't have any knowledge of it, or who knew of it, but like, it wasn't there, wasn't necessary to recreating it or something. And luckily, the rebels happened to escape with a functional reactionless drive, and then they destroyed all of their information that they left, so they escaped with it. And then they escaped with the information for the jump drive, or the hyperdrive. It turns out the hyperdrives can't be recreated, so it was a jump drive, was what they ended up making eventually. Well, anyway, the Federation ended up creating the Armageddon. It's a huge, huge warship that took advantage of the hyperdrive. Well, the thing that was discovered here is what was left. It was a shipwreck, meaning it wasn't an entire ship. Whenever they created the Armageddon, it was too large for the engine. So when they fired it up, it ripped the ship in half. And it was immediately lost. And then after this, it was around the same time that massive infighting happened with the Federation, and there was big problems. Anyway, they ended up reforming into the EDF, the Earth Defense Force, instead of the Federation. And some dude got into the top of it, and he called himself the Director. And he became like the de facto head of Earth and over bajillions of people. And he's a very heartless individual. Think like a hardcore dictatorship almost, but over lots of places. This is also around mid-TL10. So this is up there. This is like Gauss weaponry. TL9 is still conventional weaponry, but like, efficient conventional weaponry, so caseless ammo, stuff like that. TL10 is like Gauss weapons. So after this, the EDF vowed to hunt down and kill all rebel scum. And this took a long time, as you can tell. This hunt went on for a very, very, very long time. And it sowed a lot of seeds of hate for the EDF from the outer colonies and even from some of the inner colonies. Well, around this time period, we hit early TL11, which is like lasers and stuff like that. And then the far colonies started getting angry again, started getting angsty, and they started fighting back with insurrections. Eventually, due to how it was handled from the EDF, they ended up breaking off and calling themselves the SCAF, which is directly from Dead Space. I really like that name. It's the Sovereign Colonies, or Sovereign Colonies Armed Forces. So, they did their thing. And this is where two timelines go side by side. And the EDF eventually has the Second Galactic War on their hands, so like Worlds War II, and the Sovereign Colonies are declared around the same time period, and they tried really, really hard to work things out in a peaceful manner, at least as peaceful as you can imagine. It did not work. The EDF had no interest in dealing with anybody other than themselves, and they refused to acknowledge any power other than their own. So, diplomats were killed on sight. Anybody who was found housing the rebels were just, planets glassed, that kind of deal. Unpleasant. So, big, huge war. And it was an even bigger war of attrition, because now they were actually fighting another government, and the bigger of a stink the EDF made, the more people joined the sovereign colonies, and the larger their force grew, and so on and so forth. Anyway, so the sovereign colonies found the Armageddon, or what was left of it, and I should probably note that around in here, technically a little ways back, around in between the Armageddon, this is whenever jump technology became available. So for those of you who are familiar with the Traveler system, that's how people get around here. That's the only FTL available to 99.99999%, as in the only ones that doesn't is the Armageddon itself. So jump allows you to jump up to like 2 parsecs at a time, but which is still a really long ways. It opens up most of space travel, which is where all the rest of this comes from. But they consume fuel, and it takes a week per jump. So, yeah. Uh, the Armageddon was found, so it's been lost for, what, 35 to 46? Almost 1,000 years. It was like 700 years or so. And the sovereign colonies stumbled upon its wreckage. And whenever it's found sitting inside of an asteroid field, and the sovereign colonies got their buttocks whipped in a fight, and they were trying to escape, and they had just happened to find it, and the captain, who was the captain of the Osiris at the time, he took and recognized it for what it was, and convinced he convinced one of the ships that was smaller and faster to take the wreckage and get it back to the home base of the sovereign colonies, and everybody else will stand and fight and try to buy them time and try to make it look like they were cornered. And so through, he was a really good leader and a very inspirational man, and if he was willing to stand there and die, then everybody else was too. They didn't really know what they were fighting for, but they figured, due to his speech that wasn't exactly 100% truthful, because not everybody needed to know what was going on, everybody fought down to the last man. But it allowed a smaller ship to escape. The smaller ship was eventually got back to the sovereign colonies. This is where the new inventory comes from. And it was retrofitted and then to another ship, and the new ship was like modified and changed. It took a little while, as you can see, a couple years. But eventually, it was christened the Osiris after the captain that helped it escape. And it did its thing. It was the flagship of the SCAF. It allowed them to keep up with the EDF's numbers through ease of moving through space. So the Osiris was able to jump from colony to colony to colony and transport weapons and small, I don't want to say small numbers, because it's still a pretty big ship. It was almost 2,000 yards long. So it was able to transport weapons and then armor and then, vehicles and stuff like that between fights. It didn't carry enough to just invade EDF space, but, it carried enough to make itself a very large thorn in the EDF side. So, the war changed because of the Osiris. And they found out that this hard fight becomes significantly harder over time. It's pretty rough, and there we go. The Osiris went missing again. It vanished. It was in service for like 12 years. It was delivering supplies to a colony on the side, way out in the middle of nowhere, and it was leaving to go back to home base. And as it was leaving, it sent a message back to the colony and said that the ship had turned itself on, or the hyperdrive had turned itself on, and it was jumping to coordinates that they didn't know and they didn't understand, because it was alien tech and they never worked out all the kinks. But they're trying to figure out what happened, and then it jumped and vanished, and nobody saw it for a very, very long time. This is year 4,400. Like, literally the next time it's seen is at the beginning of the actual campaign, which is like 7,000 years. So it's been gone for like 2.5. It's pretty rough. But anyway, around this time period, the EDF found something new. They found new alien tech. What is the new alien tech, you ask? It's 3 massive warships of alien design, and they're all equipped with these hyperdrives. Super dangerous. Like, bad juju for the SCAF. And it's basically absolute worst case scenario times 10. And it took a while to get them refitted back out. Not that super long time, just because of the sheer amount of resources they had available. But once they had a crew trained to use this stuff, and then they were all shipped out and sent to go fight. Catastrophe on the SCAF side. They were standing at their base of operations, their capital, the SCAF capital, and then all of a sudden these three massive warships just drop out of hyperspace and then wipe the city from the face of the planet. That's a pretty big catastrophe where I come from. And yeah, after that, people were like, huh. And the colonies started jumping ship from the other colony, from the sovereign colonies, and started breaking up and running away. That way they wouldn't be tied to each other. And they were losing a lot of stuff, etc. Well, this is 44. The game starts in 63. So, like, The SCAF kind of fell apart after this time period. There was a lot of other problems, but the catastrophe is also linked to another event. It's basically the same event because it happened back to back. But the captains of those three warships, the oh god, what are they called? The Apophis. Yeah, the Shiva, the Perseus, and the Apophis. The captain of the all of them gained new information to go and start just scorching cities, and one of the captains actually had a heart, and he was the captain of the Apophis, and he was against killing civilians indiscriminately. It's one thing to fight like enemy warriors, but it's another thing to just kill people indiscriminately. Like he didn't like that idea. So whenever he brought it up, he was immediately relieved of command, and he was told to stand back and stand down and be boarded, and removed from his his station, and to be imprisoned for his crimes. Because the EDF don't like people who think for themselves. That's not okay. Well, he told them, "Oh right." He stopped doing what he was doing. He docked the ship, and then the other two docked to the sides, and he also gave a very rousing speech, much like the captain of the Osiris from forever ago. And turns out that most of the people on his ship really liked him a lot from where they had, he'd earned their respect from where he'd been running drills and stuff with them for the past couple of years. And his men decided that they were with him to the end. And those who didn't, well, that was their problem. And so he waited until they had docked. And after they had docked, he had opened weapons, or opened fire with his weapons, and TL-12 alien technology just kind of tears things to pieces. It has the whole eggshells armed with sledgehammers, like our naval defense does, to a T, and he very much quickly dismembered the other ships. He started with their hyperdrives and engines so they couldn't escape, and then after that, it was pretty much the end of it. He just shredded the ship, and he killed both of the other ships and then escaped. Ever since then, the ship has been a pirate ship, essentially, and they take it upon themselves to knock anybody off their high horse, and mostly that has to do with the EDF. But anyway, the campaign starts at mid-TL 11 for Earth, and then like mid-TL 10 for like most of the sovereign colonies. And then the game starts the new beginning here. The game starts with them finding the PCs found. Let me rephrase that. The PCs were all imprisoned. They're all prisoners, and they were deemed expendable. And the EDF found the SOS of the Osirises, or the reworked Armageddon, the Osiris. Again, the last time that had been seen was in 4397. It's 6386. It's been a really long time, almost 1,000 years, that this thing's been gone. Almost 1,900 years. I can math, I swear. I can pretend I can math pretty good. But anyway, they picked up the SOS from the Armageddon, and that's an important piece of technology. They can't let anybody else have that. It was a big pain to deal with the SCAF having it. So they, with where it was sent and how long the transmission was and all that good stuff, they weren't It was so far away. It's at the edge of known human space. Nobody has ever gone out further because they don't know what's out there. And since none of the relays point out there, so like, man, they don't really. Yeah, basically. So, using the jump drives, it will take a very, very long time to get from the furthest outer colonies all the way to where the Osiris currently is. And kind of an emergency meeting was called, and they decided that they were going to send somebody expendable out. So who they sent was they sent a bunch of prisoners who they assumed couldn't possibly have the correct skill set in order to do this. You know, big major wanted people, you know, killers and the like. They stuck a bomb implant in their head and an AI to make sure they didn't do anything stupid, and sent them with a small group of guards to, like, you know, give them instructions and to rein in the beast, so to speak, and keep people from tampering with their stuff. And launched them out into the middle of nowhere. That way they could reclaim the ship as their own, since apparently it hasn't moved in hundreds of years, and that's not exactly normal. But they also don't know if the ship's even going to be there. So, like, that's why they don't want to waste anybody in particular, because getting there is going to be one thing. Getting back is going to be another. And by another, I mean physically impossible, unless they, activate the hyperdrive on the ship and send it back. So they just kind of assumed this is a lost cause and launched them out there, right? Well, as you can tell from the whole Necrospace, they find it, but it's not in good condition. It's got some problems. There's an outbreak of some sort on it, and it's awful. If you want to know what happens after that, you just have to watch the video. But that's, I think, everything that's at least immediately important. That isn't the whole timeline, of course, but that is a significant portion of the timeline, and goes into some pretty good details about how and why things are the way that they are.